Good evening, everybody. Thank you to everybody that's joined the webinar so far this evening. It looks like we're just having one or two technical glitches at the moment, so we'll leave it a few minutes before we get started to allow other people to join. If you can hear me okay at the moment, if you can just pop yes in the chat, just to let me know that you can hear, that would be great. Excellent, thank you. It looks like the people that are here at least can hear me. Thank you very much for answering in the chat. That's great. We will still just give everybody a few more minutes to hopefully allow them to join. I must also let you know that this webinar is being recorded. I was on mute. Thank you very much. I put myself on mute just while we were waiting for others to join. Welcome to everybody that's joined this Spillers webinar so far this evening. My name's Sarah. We have unfortunately had a few technical glitches, so I'm just allowing everybody a few extra minutes to join should they like to. And thank you to everybody who's let me know in the chat that you can hear me. And I just need to let you know that this Spillers webinar is being recorded. Thank you again to everybody that has joined this Spillers webinar so far this evening. My name's Sarah. I'm a nutritionist for Spillers and will be starting this webinar with my co-host Isabel very shortly. We have unfortunately had a few technical glitches so far this evening, but it looks like we're almost ready to get started. Okay. Oh, hello, Isabel.
Sorry, I was just checking you could see me, that's all.
No, I can't see you, which is there you are. Thank you. So, welcome again to everybody that has joined this Spillers webinar this evening. Thank you so much for your patience. I do appreciate we're almost 10 minutes late. As I explained, we have had a few technical glitches, but we are up and running, I believe, now, and everybody can hear me, I think, which is great. So, we are going to go full steam ahead now, and I will try sharing my screen with you. I'm joined this evening by my colleague Isabel. Some of you will have met Isabel before, I am sure, and she will be available throughout the evening to answer questions in the chat. She'll do her best to keep up with you. We are going to be asking you some questions as well at various points, and we'll be asking you to pop your answers to those questions in the chat. So, Isabel, can you give me the nod if you can see my slides? Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody here this evening that forage should be the foundation of every adult horse's diet. Now, that doesn't matter whether that's a retired horse, a horse at rest, a breeding horse, a leisure horse, a competition horse, or any sort of horse or pony in between. A high fibre diet is, of course, essential for maintaining digestive health, and feeding forage, very importantly, fulfills the horse's need to chew. Horses have what we often describe as a psychological and a physiological need to chew, and that chewing supports gastric health and mental well-being. And it also provides a significant source of energy or calories. And for many leisure horses and ponies, it may be the main or the only source of calories in their diet. There are, however, a couple of areas where forage falls short, and that's one of them being providing a balanced diet. So unfortunately, we can't rely on forage, whether that be grass, hay or haylage, to provide a balanced supply of vitamins, minerals and quality protein. And for some, but not all, horses and ponies, forage alone can't meet the horse's energy or calorie requirements. So a really good place to start is to ask yourself a very simple question, and that is, does your horse maintain weight easily on forage alone? And if the answer to that question is yes, or perhaps yes too easily, then a balancer is the ideal way to top up the shortfall in nutrients without providing excess calories, starch or sugar. If you have a horse or pony that can't maintain a healthy body weight on forage, that's when we look at using a compound feed such as a mix or a cube, or potentially another type of feed that's fully balanced with vitamins and minerals. So perhaps a mash or a short chop fibre with added vitamins and minerals. Just bear with me, there we go. So for the rest of this evening, we're going to focus on conserved forage. So hay and haylage, but also other alternatives to those. So feeding straw, for example, as a partial forage replacer, feeding hay replacers. We're also going to talk about soaking versus steaming. Various questions about hay soaking we'll hopefully be able to answer for you. Forage is, of course, a huge topic, and we don't unfortunately have time to talk about grass as well this evening, but potentially that can be a subject for the future. So I'm going to hand over to you quite early on to get your thinking and make sure that you're still with me by asking you a question. And if you can pop your answer to this question in the chat, Isabel will be keeping an eye on it and giving me a clue as to what you're saying. So what is the biggest difference between hay and haylage?
We have some people typing, Sarah, so I shall have some
Excellent.
answers. Level of moisture, or clever people we've got here. Dry matter content. 2 people have said that.
Excellent. Well, it's great to have some answers coming through so early in the evening. So you've probably heard the phrase, make hay while the sun shines. Farmers for generations have conserved grass for when grazing is in short supply in the winter by making hay or haylage. So haylage relies on the removal of water, whereas making hay relies on the removal of water, whereas making haylage relies on the exclusion of oxygen. So hay is left to dry before baling, and haylage is left to wilt for a few days and then wrapped in plastic. So as a couple of people have already told us this evening, the biggest difference is the water content. Hay contains approximately 10 to 15% water, but haylage is much higher in water and far more variable in its water content. And you can see there that the water content for haylage varies between 20 to 50%. Something that doesn't vary, or it can vary, but between hay and haylage is the nutrient content. So it's really important to acknowledge that there are many factors that affect the nutrient content of both hay and haylage. Those include the grass species, management of the grass, environmental conditions during the growing season and the harvest, and the maturity of the grass at the time of harvest. And I've made that last point a bit bigger and written it in a different colour because this one's particularly important. But all of these factors, especially the maturity of the grass at the time of harvest, all have a greater bearing on the nutrient content of your forage than whether it's hay or haylage per se. And in fact, if you cut hay and haylage from the same field at the same time, you may see very little difference in the nutrient profile. So a couple of mythbusters for you on this slide. Haylage is not automatically higher in calories or sugar than hay. Even low-calorie hay may exceed requirements for good doers. Anybody in the audience that has a good doer may be only too familiar with that point. Both hay and haylage can easily contain more than 20% water-soluble carbohydrate or sugar. Now, the recommendation for WSC and laminitics is that all forage for laminitics should contain less than 10 to 12% NSC, which is sugar plus starch, or WSC plus starch. So that's quite significant to note that actually hay and haylage could easily contain more than 20% WSC, and actually both can contain more than 30%. Even hay cut from low sugar grass species such as timothy may be too high in WSC for laminitics. So all cool season grasses or grasses that grow in temperate climates are capable in the right conditions of accumulating more than 20% WSC. And the calorie and the sugar content doesn't decline over time or in storage. So on a practical level, that means that last year's hay isn't automatically more suitable for good doers or laminitics. So if hay and haylage, or haylage isn't necessarily higher in calories than hay, why is it that we sometimes hear people say that hay may be a more suitable choice for good doers? Well, there are several practical reasons why hay may be more suitable. One of them being that you can soak it to help reduce the sugar content. And of course, less sugar means fewer calories. Hay contains less water, as we've already seen this evening. So in practical terms, that means it's easier to know how much you're really feeding. And we're going to talk about this in a bit more detail shortly. And some horses may find haylage more palatable than hay. So they may simply eat restricted rations more quickly if you feed them haylage rather than hay. So grazing in the UK, and in turn hay and haylage, may be low in key minerals including copper, zinc and selenium. Remember, we've already said that unfortunately we can't rely on grass, hay or haylage to provide a balanced diet. Levels of vitamin A and E may be negligible in hay and haylage. The quality of protein in UK hay and haylage may be low, even if the total amount of protein is not low. And it's really important that we don't make assumptions about the nutrient content of hay or haylage based on the grass species, maturity, or the colour. So green hay isn't automatically richer, and brown hay is not necessarily lower in sugar or nutrients. And forage analysis really is the most reliable indicator of the nutrient content of any forage. And just a point that if your horse or pony does maintain weight easily on forage alone, a benefit of choosing a balancer over a broad spectrum vitamin and mineral supplement is that balancers also provide a source of amino acids or quality protein, whereas vitamin and mineral supplements typically just provide that, vitamins and minerals. So particularly if your horse is on restricted grazing or poor quality grazing, or they're perhaps doing more work, then using a balancer rather than a vitamin and mineral supplement may be an added advantage because it supplies some additional quality protein in the form of amino acids. Now, I did mention forage analysis a moment ago, and forage analysis is quite a complex subject. It can cause quite a bit of confusion, and we could in fact do a whole webinar just on forage analysis. So the one thing that I wanted to point out this evening is that there are two methods of having your forage analysed. One is for short NIR or NIRS, and the other is wet chemistry. If you're concerned about the sugar content of your forage, particularly for laminitis, for example, then it's important that you choose the wet chemistry method and you have your forage analysed specifically for water-soluble carbohydrate. Now, as I said, forage analysis can be quite a confusing topic and feel like a bit of a minefield. So if you are thinking about having your forage analysed, it's worth seeking advice from a nutrition advisor. So you could perhaps call the Spillers Care line if you're looking for some help, and we'll be more than happy to offer some advice. So one question we get asked quite a lot is, how much hay or haylage should I feed? Now, the easy part of the answer is ideally as much as your horse or pony will eat, while being mindful of excess waste. So we always advise that you try to monitor how much your horse or pony is eating as well as how much you're feeding. And that can have a number of benefits, one being that it helps you to avoid waste, and of course it helps you to know how much your horse or pony is choosing to eat, because providing plenty of forage is all well and good, but if, for example, your horse or pony has a poor appetite, they may not be eating enough hay or haylage. But I'm sure many people in this audience will know that allowing the horse or pony to eat as much hay or haylage as they would like to isn't always practical for good doers. And many good doers will need some degree of forage restriction. So for most overweight horses or ponies, or very good doers, those that are very prone to gaining weight, total daily forage intake, now that does include grazing, shouldn't be restricted to less than 1.5% of their current body weight on a dry matter basis. Now, that word dry matter has creeped in again since somebody popped it in the chat earlier. And this is dry matter is a complex phenomena. And it again is something that can cause confusion, but it is quite important, particularly if you are feeding restricted amounts of hay or haylage. So I'm going to hand over to you, and there's no right or wrong answer to this question. We're just really interested to know, have you heard the term dry matter before? So pop your answers in the chat. Isabel will keep an eye for me and let me know what's coming through?
The resounding, one person had said no, but the resounding is a yes or thumbs up. Love to see the emojis.
Excellent. Interesting. Perhaps some of these people have joined a Spillers webinar before. So, what does dry matter really mean? And another term you might hear is as fed. So remember, back at the start, we said all forage contains some water, and the water, importantly, doesn't count towards the horse's forage intake. So in really simple terms, as fed is the amount of forage that you weigh out, and dry matter is the amount you weigh out minus the water. So if, for example, you weigh out 8 kilos of hay, around 1 kilo of that will be water, which leaves you with about 7 kilos of dry matter, or what I sometimes describe as actual hay. If you were to weigh out 8 kilos of haylage, then around 4 to 6 kilos of that will be dry matter or actual hay, and the rest will, of course, be water. Oh, the slides won't move. So the next thing I thought we'd move on to is some practical tips for choosing hay and haylage. So hay should smell sweet, but it can vary in colour from a pale yellow green right through to bright green. And remember that the colour of your hay isn't a reliable indicator of the nutrient content, and it should also be free from weeds. You should discard any hay that's obviously dusty, smells musty, or shows visible signs of mould. And hay should not be warm or damp to the touch. And if it is, it's a sign that it may not have been dried properly, and that means that it will be at increased risk of going mouldy. Haylage again should smell sweet, although it's normal for haylage to smell slightly fermented, although it shouldn't smell off or rancid or really acidic like haylage. If it's farmer grown haylage, it should be well wrapped in at least 6 layers of plastic. You should need a knife to open your haylage. If you can get into it just with your fingertips, it hasn't been wrapped well enough. And just like hay, it should, of course, be free from weeds. Return or dispose any bales of haylage with holes in the plastic, because this will, of course, allow air to enter the bale, and that could start the growth of molds and yeasts. Consider how much haylage you're going to be feeding when you're choosing the bales, because haylage spoils once it's been opened and should be used within 3 to 5 days. Don't feed haylage that's obviously contaminated with soil, and return any that's, or discard, that's contains animal carcasses. Apologies, sometimes my slides just don't want to move this evening. Soaking hay is commonly used in this country. It's often recommended to help reduce the sugar content. And I say help reduce the sugar content because unfortunately there are no guarantees with hay soaking. Soaking helps to reduce the sugar content, but losses are highly variable. And unfortunately, they're unpredictable too. We know that the length of time you soak influences sugar losses, and we also know that the temperature of the water influences sugar losses. And I think the question of how long to soak hay for is one that often receives conflicting advice, which can lead to confusion. I'm sure Isabel will agree. She gets asked this question a lot and she sees a lot of confusion. And unfortunately, the answer isn't set in stone. But based on published research our advice and guidance is to soak for 1 to 3 hours in warm or hot weather. And by that, we mean an ambient temperature of 16 degrees C and above, and to soak for 6 to 12 hours in cold weather. And why is it that we have this difference? Well, we've already said that the temperature of the water influences WSC losses, as does the length of the soak. In general, the longer you soak it for, the greater the WSC losses. We do also know that soaking causes an increase in bacterial or microbial contamination, and the relevance of this is still not fully understood. So reducing the length of soak to 1 to 3 hours in hot weather just is there to help maintain a balance between hygiene and maximising sugar losses. So now I have another question for you. So if you are going to soak your hay, should you weigh out more hay if you intend to soak it before feeding? Should you weigh out less hay if you intend to soak it? Or should you weigh out the same amount of hay regardless of whether you intend to soak it before feeding? And again, pop your answers into the chat. And Isabel will...
Oh, Sarah seems to have frozen. If you just keep putting your answers into the chat, that will be great. I'm sure she'll be...
Hopefully I'll be back soon.
In a second.
Am I back, Isabel? I heard you say I was frozen. Isabel, am I back? It seems like you might have lost me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment and see if that helps. Isabel, can you hear me? Isabel has gone. Thank you for popping that message in the chat. I do apologise. It seems we are having a few technical problems. Thank you, Shez, for confirming that you can hear me. It appears that we've lost Isabel.
I'm back on my phone. Apologies.
You're back on your phone. Aren't we just being plagued by trouble this evening?
IT. For some reason, my laptop has just thrown me out completely. So I am on my phone.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience and your helpful messages in the chat. We do really appreciate it. So I'm going to share my screen again now. And Isabel, can you just give me the nod to let me know that you can see my slides?
I can see
Fabulous.
it. And I'm not sure if you saw the chat and everybody answered, but the answers are a mixture of A and C.
A mixture of A and C.
Yeah.
Interesting. So nobody said less, which is interesting. So the answer is you need to weigh out more hay, if you intend to soak it before you feed it. And that's because when you soak the hay, you get a loss of nutrients, sugar, of course, but also some other nutrients too, into the water. So that means you get a loss of dry matter, or essentially hay. So your hay net will contain more water, but less actual hay after you've soaked it. So if assuming your horse eats the whole hay net. If you weigh out 8 kilos of hay and you feed it dry, your horse will eat around 7 kilos of hay because the rest will be water. If you weigh out 8 kilos of hay and then soak it before feeding, then they will consume about 5.5 kilos of actual hay because of the loss of nutrients into the water. So if we don't increase the amount of hay that we soak, we may inadvertently end up restricting our horse's forage intake too severely. So if you've already got your horse or pony on a restricted forage diet, this could make a real difference to their forage intake, particularly if you have a very overweight or laminitic pony that doesn't have access to grazing and you're feeding them restricted amounts of hay. So what practical tips can we offer you for hay soaking? So starting with that loss of dry matter or hay during soaking, as a practical guide, we suggest that you increase the amount of hay you soak by about 20% to make sure that you're not restricting your horse's forage intake too severely. Use fresh water for every soak, and that's for 2 reasons, partly for hygiene and also to help maximise WSC or sugar losses. Make sure that the hay is fully submerged into the water and ideally soak out of direct sunlight in hot weather. And feeding an appropriate balancer is especially important. Now, I say especially important because I've already explained this evening that even dry hay or haylage can't be relied upon to provide a fully balanced diet. So every horse or pony that maintains weight well on forage alone should be fed a balancer or a broad spectrum vitamin and mineral supplement. But you do get some loss of vitamins, minerals and protein when you soak hay. So feeding a suitable balancer is particularly important. If you're soaking your hay to reduce the dust content, then the advice is slightly different. Again, the rules aren't set in stone regarding the length of soak, but around 20 to 30 minutes as a guide. The potential benefit of soaking hay for respiratory health is that all forage, including haylage, in fact, contains what are called respirable particles, so tiny mold, dust and yeast spores that are small enough for the horse to inhale, which can of course lead to respiratory irritation. And if you soak your hay, it causes those particles to swell so that they're swallowed rather than inhaled. Again, you need to make sure that your hay is fully submerged into the water, and it's important that you feed your hay immediately after soaking, because if the hay dries out, then those particles may become airborne again. Now, soaking versus steaming is another query that comes up sometimes. And soaking in a commercial steamer is by far the superior option for improving hygienic quality. And that's because, as well as reducing the number of particles that are small enough for the horse to inhale, it also kills mold and bacterial contaminants, yeast spores, etc. I say a commercial steamer because it's really important that the steam penetrates right through to the centre of the bale or the hay net, and that the steamer gets hot enough. Homemade steamers may in fact just act as an incubator for bacteria, which of course will have the opposite effect in terms of hygienic quality. Steaming doesn't, unfortunately, have much of an effect on the sugar content of hay, though. Now, although it's not always possible in practice, You can soak your hay and then steam it, and that will help to achieve the best of both worlds in terms of reducing the sugar content and improving hygienic quality. And some horses find steamed hay more palatable than dry hay. And that "did you know" there at the bottom of the screen is to remind me that you can steam straw to improve the hygienic quality before feeding. So if using straw is something that you're thinking about because your horse is a good doer, steaming straw is an option. And you can also steam haylage to help extend the shelf life of the bale after it's been opened. Feeding straw can be a useful way of helping to dilute the calorie content of the forage ration. And for some good doers, that may mean that you don't need to restrict your horse's total forage intake so severely. It is important to note that we say good doers without dental issues. So feeding straw from a bale generally is not as advisable for horses and ponies with dental issue, but small amounts of soft, short chopped straw in a forage replacer or chaff, for example, may well still be absolutely suitable. Straw must be of good hygienic quality and introduced gradually. The hygienic quality is more important than the type of straw that you feed. So oat, wheat and barley straw are suitable. And as a guide, we suggest replacing up to 30 to 50% of the hay ration as straw. And on a practical level, you can feed 1 kilo of straw to replace 1 kilo of dry hay. And the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about this evening, I know this has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour of hay haylage and hay replacers, is hay replacers. The most common reason people need to feed a hay replacer is a dental issue, but sometimes hay replacers are needed in times of a forage shortage, or if a suitable forage can't be found, for example, for severely laminitic horses and ponies. So what tips can we offer you, first of all, for choosing a hay replacer? And the first one I've got here is to remember that not all chaffs or short chop fibres, fibre cubes and mashes are suitable for feeding as a hay replacer. So make sure that you check the feeding instructions. Just because it says high fibre or it's short chop fibre in the bag, it's not necessarily suitable for feeding as a hay replacer, or it may only be suitable as feeding as a partial hay replacer. So if you're unsure, always contact the manufacturer, or of course seek advice from a nutrition advisor. Check the calorie level. So hay replacers come in different formats and also different calorie levels. Some contain a similar level of calories to average meadow hay, around 8 megajoules of digestible energy per kilo, but others may contain the same amount of calories as spring grass or a conditioning feed. So it's really important that you consider the calorie content. Ideally, include at least some short chopped fibre, because this helps to maintain or increase chewing time. And chewing, as we touched on at the start of this webinar, is really important for maintaining mental well-being. Horses evolved to spend 16 to 18 hours a day foraging. But remember that some horses with very poor teeth may need 100% of their diet replaced with a mash. So if they're unable to choose short chop fibre, you'll need to consider something that can be soaked to make a mash. And short chop fibres are not suitable for horses with diastemas or gaps between their teeth. If your horse is prone to laminitis, make sure that any hay replacer that you choose is low in sugar and starch, and avoid grass-based products for those prone to laminitis because they may be very high in naturally occurring sugar or water-soluble carbohydrate, to use the technical term. In practice, you can feed 1 kilo of hay replacer. Now that's the pre-soaked weight to replace 1 kilo of dry hay. But remember that feeds vary in density considerably. So 1 scoop of chaff, for example, will weigh considerably less than 1 scoop of cubes. So just as an approximate guide, 1 kilo of hay replacer is equivalent to around half a stub scoop of cubes, half to 1 stub scoops of dry or unsoaked mash, but around 2 to 4 scoops of short chop fibre. And always remember to weigh your mash or sugar beet if you're using sugar beet as a partial hay replacer before you soak it. The increase in volume after you've soaked a mash can make it really easy to underestimate how much you're feeding. And a few tips for feeding a hay replacer. Ideally, hay replacers should be divided into a minimum of 4 meals for horses and ponies without access to grazing. Consider separating horses from their companions if they're kept in the field at meal times, and this is to prevent sharing or bullying. And dividing hay replacers between multiple buckets can help to encourage grazing behaviour. So some horses will learn to regulate their intake, but dividing rations between several buckets can help to encourage some of them to eat more slowly. So that does bring me to the end of my whistle-stop tour of hay, haylage and hay replacers. We will give you the opportunity to come off mute and ask some questions if you would like to, or you can continue to type your questions in the chat. We will just stay on for a few extra minutes because I know we started a little bit late. There is a QR code on the screen now. This is if you would like to take our quiz just to see how much you've learnt, you can scan this QR code. This quiz is open to everybody and you will get a certificate at the end for taking part. There is no pass or fail mark, it's just a little bit of fun. We will hopefully be sending you a link out for the quizzes, but there is unfortunately a global issue at the moment, I believe, with MailChimp, which is the platform we use for sending out links to quizzes. So if we're unable to send out the link to you by email, you can still use this QR code. If you are joining us this evening because you would like to gain AMPTRA CPD points, you need to do a quiz as well. This is a different quiz. So the QR code that's on the screen now is for AMPTRA members only. And this quiz is only going to be live for 24 hours. And this quiz isn't a multiple choice answer quiz. And you will need to score 8 out of 10 in order to gain your CPD points. But I am going to stop sharing my screen now just to make it a little bit easier for me to see Isabel and the chat. If I'm not sure, Isabel, if you are able to take people off of mute and if you're able to stop the recording.
I will certainly give it a go. Bear with me, Teams is different. So I just have to navigate my way around it. So
No
I have
problem.
now stopped recording. So
Lovely.
that's a good start.